I know you follow US politics. How big do you think that election is, and what two different scenarios do you foresee depending on the result?
You've got two options. You've got Trump wins. We see things stabilise, broadly speaking. We hopefully see war get nipped in the bud. He's the best hope we have for settling the world on the conflict front, because he had a peaceful 4 years the first time he was there. Can start to see him hopefully drop crime rates. Women and children are the most vulnerable they've ever been in the US. They're fearful to walk down the street. There's illegal aliens and criminals running across the border. It's absolute chaos. If Kamala wins, well, then we have a large problem, because she fuels and feeds directly into the globalist agenda. You know, the ties to your WFs, the Bilderberg groups, all the shadowy organisations that are pulling the strings, so to speak. They have her tied up. You'll have a certain amount of carbon credits. You'll have a digital currency on a universal basic income every month. The censorship controls, the bills passed, the potentially outlaw of guns, the obliteration of key constitutional pillars in the US get brought into question. That whole theme gets accelerated. It gets ramped up.
My guest on today's episode is an Australian entrepreneur, investor, documentary filmmaker, and podcaster. His podcast and mini docos are a deep dive into the shadows beneath the veil of manufactured illusion. The high production quality and compelling narrative make these essential viewing. So compelling is his content that he was recently picked up by Alex Jones and invited onto his American production show InfoWars. Welcome, Nathan Derriman. There's the worldview that we have, but then there's the worldview that we're given. And most of us, our worldview is the one that's given to us. And it's conveniently given to us, isn't it? I mean, we're told how to view the world, and we're told that by our parents, our teachers, and then the media, and more lately, our governments, and that we're being given our worldview rather than finding our own version. And my view of the world is not congruent with the view that I'm being told to have. And I see that in your content as well, is that you're curious and interested in what's going on behind the scenes, and I'm not going to accept what I'm being told to see as the world, and I'm going to formulate my own opinions and my own ideas and my own worldview. And I'm the same. And so, you know, we just met recently through a mutual friend, Tom, and straight away when I looked at your content, I'm like, I need to really talk to this guy, because he thinks and sees things similar to the way I do. So basically what I'm up to is I'm a shadow work coach. And so I'm interested in all things shadowy. And the definition of shadow really is just that which is hidden. So I've always been this way. Astrologically, it's because my sun is in the 8th house, which means I'm interested in the occult, the taboo, the hidden. And so I don't know how to do things differently. And so I can't... But the moment I caught on to your content, I'm like, someone else kind of gets it and resonates with how I see things. So my question to you, my first question was, what got you interested in looking behind the veil? And have you always been this way?
I wouldn't say I've always been this way, but often people that resonate with exactly what you've just said often have a moment or something that happens to them that shifts them or lifts the veil, which you just mentioned. And for me, that was when I was about 14 and I was reading Fingerprints of the Gods, written by Graham Hancock, who in the archaeological world has been condemned for truth-seeking and asking really tough questions. And when I read that book, it was extremely transformative, because they were really quite simple questions about the history that we'd been told about these ancient cultures and how things were built and the alignments to significant astrological events and all these sort of things that I'd been interested in at school, but the narrative I'd been told didn't really match up with my instinct. And when I read his book and his subsequent books, but The Fingerprint of the Gods was the first one, I was just blown away at how well it connected with my instinct. Now, I didn't know it. I wasn't developed enough in my learning or in my research at that age to be able to piece the bigger picture together. But it allowed me to feel something that I'd never felt before, which was maybe you need to start listening to that voice that's deep within a bit more and nurture this. And from then on, I spiraled into your more typical conspiracy stuff. Conspiracy, I don't like that word because that was actually a word invented by the CIA to discredit things, which I'm strongly against. But we'll use it for namesake. Moved into the more typical ones like aliens and, what's at Area 51 and, what are the connections with the CIA to the cover-ups during Roswell and the links to the nuclear testing during the Trinity tests. And then it just spiraled into all these things. But funnily enough, in the playground, whenever I try and talk about these things with my school friends, they'd all just laugh at me. They'd be like, Chase, what are you on about here? Like, there's no way this has got any credence at all. And I always stuck true. I mean, the 9/11 as well was probably the biggest one that I hammered on about. And no one ever believed me. And sure enough, all these things start to play out. And even the mainstream start to pick up on it well and truly after the fact. And then you go, well, this is good. This is reaffirming my instinct. And when you feel like your instinct has been reaffirmed continuously, it gives you so much more strength to keep following it. And that's how it really started for me, was Graham Hancock. So if you see one of these reels that we snip up, or the full podcast, I want to give a big shout out to him, because his work really made me question everything.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, you don't just take things on face value. You want to question. So you're by nature skeptical.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I am too. It's interesting you don't like the word conspiracy. It wasn't actually invented by the CIA. It was just repurposed.
Yeah. That's probably the better way to put it. I mean, it's a word, but they've implemented it in.
Same with the word drug. I mean, some of these words are just mislabeled and repurposed. Conspire means with spirit. So to conspire means to be with spirit.
Yeah, right.
So I don't mind conspire or conspiracy, but then we miss
the context.
Yeah, it's like propaganda. Like, propaganda is something that politicians do to misinform people. But then they turn that around and say, no, the people who are dissenting are the ones spreading the propaganda. But historically, propaganda was something that governments put out there. And I think even Barack Obama, in his term, said that the American government could even use propaganda against its own people. He passed a bill.
That's a bit of foreshadowing.
It was already legal to use propaganda against people in other countries, but he made it legal for the US government to do that to their own population.
Yeah, right.
So making propaganda, legal. Just going back one step, I think one of the things that's going on deeper behind the scenes in terms of how we formulate our worldview, you and I do it by questioning everything. A lot of other people do it by accepting everything or most things. And I think this kind of starts out, for me, probably at school. And I remember my education really was being taught what to think and not how to think. And so I had to memorize all this stuff, and that was called an education. And that's how my brain works primarily, is by remembering stuff that I read or was told. And so I don't think that's a healthy way to educate our children, teaching them what to think.
Couldn't agree more.
I think we need to be teaching our children how to think. And for that reason, you just met my 8-week-old daughter. She won't be doing a mainstream education.
No.
I don't want her being taught what to think. I want her learning, listening to her instincts, being taught how to think, being taught to question things. And so, it's homeschooling for me for that reason.
We're on board with that too. We haven't had a kid yet, my partner and I, Anth, but we will very soon, and we're completely of the same belief. I mean, I've done a few pieces on this in the past, and I'm not super proficient with my history, but I know a decent enough amount on this point. And the education system itself was actually adapted from the Prussian system by the Rockefellers in the West. So when John D. Rockefeller famously became the first billionaire from his oil monopoly, His mission was to make a world full of workers, not a world full of thinkers. And he was one of the chief architects of the education system in the US and abroad. He sent insurgents out, even to Australia. I won't be able to name names, but you can look it up for yourself. I can't remember off the top of my head, but there was people that even came out here during the early 1900s that were tasked with setting up the same sort of mold. We need a world full of workers, not thinkers. And that's just exactly to your point. People don't see how calculated this is. This has been embedded for a very long time for very good reasons. They want at all costs the preservation of their power, because the only way that their power gets toppled are free thinkers.
Yeah.
And that's why we're dangerous, and they don't want many of us. And I'm at the point now where I just don't care enough in terms of keeping it hidden. I want to talk about it. I want to be open, because it's liberating.
It is.
There's danger that comes with it, I guess, but it's liberating, and it has to be talked about. So, yeah, I hated school. I had a couple of good mentors, and I was fortunate enough, like Tom, our mutual friend, we went to a really good school. We're immensely thankful to our parents for sending us there. My parents had to remortgage the house to send me there. And out of that experience, I got a couple of good mentors, like some really good people that were good at their job. They were good teachers, but above all, they knew how to cut through and actually instill some good values in their classroom and in the kids, which is beyond the subject matter that you're actually looking at. That's why it sticks with me to this day. I can't remember what they taught me from a curriculum standpoint, but I remember the things they instilled in me. So I'm very thankful for that. But yeah, in terms of schooling as a whole, it's pretty much useless in the current form.
Yeah, because they're not producing free thinkers.
No.
And to be able to think freely, you need to be able to speak freely. I think this is Jordan Peterson's point.
Yeah.
And that's why he's, such a champion for free speech. And I think you're a champion for free speech, and I certainly am. Because, in order to be able to think, you need to be able to speak, and vice versa. So we want free thinkers, at least you do, I do. Maybe Rockefeller doesn't. Maybe he wants more compliant workers for his agenda. And so that's my point, is that I think we need more free thinkers, but the only way we're going to get that is if we can speak freely. And as you know, and I know, that's really being threatened at the moment. In Australia, mostly all the Western countries, UK, Ireland, US, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, they're all trying to push through these laws and these bills to restrict free speech. And you're familiar with this stuff because I've seen some of your content, and I've looked into the combating misinformation and disinformation Bill 2024, where through ACMA, the Australian Communication and Media Authority, they get the authority to fine social media companies huge millions of dollars fine if they allow content to be published on their platforms that ACMA deem to be misinformation or disinformation, and that could possibly cause harm. Now, the whole idea, I've looked into the bill, like the definitions for misinformation and disinformation are not clear, and same with the definition for harm. What is harm? And this bill's being pushed through at the moment. I think it's the second time they've tried to push it through. The first time failed. And I saw you did a piece on the E-Safety Commissioner, E-Karen.
E-Karen, yeah.
And so I'd just like to hear from you your take on why free speech is so important and what you think's going on. What do you think the agenda is? I've got an idea of what the agenda is in why the current government, but it's not just the current government. I think Labor and Liberal are both in favour of this.
Well, they pushed through the E-Safety Commission.
Right.
In 2015 was when it started, and then it really picked up just prior to COVID. But yeah, it's frightening, the free speech landscape as a whole. And yeah, there's no coincidence that all of these bills and these agendas are being pushed through at the same time in unison across the big Western countries. But the more frightening thing here is the fact that we don't actually have free speech protection. Constitutionally,
we don't.
We're not protected. We have freedom of expression, and we have constitutional insinuations of freedom of expression and saying certain things. You have freedom of innovation, freedom of creativity. It's all very loose. And then you pair that with the Anti-Discrimination Act that came in the 70s, and you can be pegged to things that are quite trivial. You know, if you go off on a rant about Indigenous cultures, or if you lose the plot in some form of anti-Semitism, or you can get pinned quite easily. I'm not saying that anyone should go do that. I'm just saying that unlike the US, we don't have those protections. So it's very alarming here in what's seemingly a great country to live. You know, I love it here. The quality of life is amazing. Most people abroad don't actually know how good it is here. It really is a beautiful country, and I love it. But when you've got them attacking people that are sort of nationalistic here, and people fighting for what we love here, that's when it becomes really scary. So to the free speech point, I don't have the answers as to how we combat this exact problem, other than doing what we're doing now and just bringing people into the inner sanctum and trying to understand just what's happening. Because, you know, you and I are the ones that go off and actually read these bills and get in the minutiae and try and understand exactly what they're doing. But to the layman or the everyday person, they're not going to do that. They don't have the time to do that. You know, they're working a 9 to 5. They're caught in the system, and these things just go through willy-nilly. They don't see it. They don't see it, and all of a sudden, just like COVID, they pull your pants down with emergency orders, and they're forcing you to have injections, which that's the frightening thing, because it could be a light switch moment where out of nowhere you're getting fined, as you just said. You're 1 minute it's all good, fine and dandy, and the next where you tread wrong online and you're caught up in serious damages financially because of what you've said. Certainly the corporations are already getting hit. We know Elon's been hit with over $600,000 in the last year alone. The Karen, Julie Inman Grant, she's on a tirade, and for your listeners' purposes, a little bit of backstory on her. She's an American lady, which also begs the question: whose interests does she truly have? She worked on the Gender Affirming Council for Biden. She still does consulting for the World Economic Forum on digital safety and transitioning compliance in the metaverse, which is a mouthful. But this is all, by the way, you can go online and you type her name in, and it is on the e-Safety Commissioner website. She also worked at Twitter for the Jack Dorsey regime there, which we now know through the Twitter files were entrenched in censorship. So look, I'm not personally attacking this woman and questioning her as an individual. I'm questioning the intent of this e-safety setup and her CV and the things that have gone on in those organisations that we know all too well. So yeah, it's a frightening landscape. I don't have the answer as to what to do other than what we're doing now. But yeah, that's where we're at.
I think her background may give you some idea as to what her possible agenda might be. If she's been associated with the WEF and still is, then she's probably a globalist.
Oh yeah,
yeah. And so maybe some people think globalism is a great idea, like having total centralisation of all power globally. I think it's a disaster. And you know, I think some of these conversations around particularly climate change, and then also the recent pandemic, I think these are manufactured conversations, and they're global problems that have been manufactured because so that they can convince people towards a global government. Because if you don't need a global government unless you've got global problems. And so all of a sudden climate change is this global problem that affects all of us. There's been a worldwide pandemic that was possibly manufactured, and now we've got global problems, so now they can push through the global agenda.
That's a good way of looking at it. I like that, global problems.
And I wouldn't be surprised if the next global problem is some sort of manufactured alien invasion, and now we've got an off-world enemy that we all need to unite around. And so, I mean, it sounds a bit conspiratorial, but...
No, I've read into that as well.
Okay.
I'm on the pulse with that one, and I agree. That's on the cards. Could be.
How they're pushing this these bills through around freedom, blocking freedom of speech is on the safety issue. They're telling you that we want to make you more safe and protect you from harm online.
Yeah.
Like, I've been online a long time. I've never come to any harm online. I've never been bullied online. What harm are they talking about? If you're going to go into some forums and all of a sudden some trolls are bullying you online and you're going to say, oh, I'm now a victim of online bullying and I'm now being harmed, well, that's you going into a neighbourhood you shouldn't go into. I don't go into rough neighbourhoods around here because it's not safe. If you're going online and you're going into some of these forums and being bullied and then putting your hand up and saying, I'm a victim and I need to be protected from online bullying by E. Karen, who's going to put these laws in place for my safety, that doesn't wash with me. Like, who are all these people that are being harmed online?
Yeah.
Where are they all?
Well, and I think the only thing they hide behind is the bullying piece. It's because they actually just push through the doxing, which is like, it's basically bullying online. You can now face up to 7 years jail in Australia. That's passed through. That's done and dusted. It's in.
For online bullying?
For online bullying. So
they define what online bullying is?
Oh, it's loose and it's within your ACMA and your all that. But that's through. So I think that's the sort of the top line framework for justifying this agenda. They go, well, no, we got suicide rates that match up to all this online stuff and online bullying, and we need this framework. And then you get into the fine print, and then the loose agendas of what we've just talked about, the censorship and the misinformation, disinformation. They always need the front.
Yeah,
that's the front. So
there's all this threat out there, of harm, and Daddy's going to come in, Big Daddy, the government, is going to come in and look after you by providing this safety against this harmful bullying, right? Now, doesn't wash with me. I've got an 8-week-old daughter. I'm going to teach her how to stand up to bullies. I was never taught how to stand up to bullies, and so I got bullied quite a bit. But I've since learned how to stand up to bullies. So you don't teach your kid how to deal with bullying by wrapping them up in cotton wool and going, and Big Daddy, I'm going to keep you safe from all the bullying. I'm going to wrap you up in bubble wrap and keep you inside to protect you from the big wide world out there where you might get bullied. No, I'm going to teach you how to stand up to bullies. So I don't need the government. I don't think any of us need the government protecting us from online bullying. Now, if I go online and somebody says something that I'm offended by, that's my responsibility.
It's your problem too.
Yeah, it's my problem. Yeah. I mean, I grew up, I'm 63, so when I grew up 60 years ago, I don't know if this is still the saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. And that's how you teach your child to be able to be okay with people saying offensive things to them. Now, if someone says something offensive to me, it says more about them, their character, than it says about mine.
Absolutely.
People can say whatever they want to me. I do this in my shadow work course. I ask my clients on my course to try and say something to offend me, because I want to demonstrate this point, that if I'm offended, I'm choosing that. So this whole thing around protecting us from online bullying, I just don't buy it, but it's how they're pushing it through. I've never been harmed by anything on internet. I'm only just recently becoming a bit more public profile. Maybe I will one day feel offended by something that somebody says to me, but I'm engaging. I'm voluntarily engaging in that platform or that neighbourhood where I could get bullied. That's on me. And so, it was the same with the pandemic. Like everything was for our safety, But again, they seem to use this same proposition for why they need to pass these really kind of draconian and really limiting, freedom-limiting laws and bills. And I think they are appealing to people's fear. By you're not safe.
They prey off fear.
Yeah, this bill will keep you safe. And as you and I know, you've probably done some reading around what happened in Stalin's Russia when you have a totalitarian regime, and it always starts out with censoring freedom of speech. Then it becomes jailing your opposition and dissidents, which is what they've been trying to do in the US with Donald Trump. And then it becomes, killing people who don't agree with you. And this happened under Stalin, 20 million people died. But always the first step is censorship of freedom of speech. The next step is jailing people who disagree with the government narrative.
Well, it happens in Canada already, doesn't it? They're doing that with if you say the wrong pronouns, you're up for huge fines or potentially jail.
So you can be jailed for misgendering somebody.
You can, yeah.
That's appalling.
You can, yeah. It's crazy. Appalling. It's crazy. But to your point, there is the online thing's a little bit delicate because it is at the top line. It is similar. It's not similar. It's the same. They are preying off fear, but with social media, it is undeniable the damage social media does, particularly to adolescents. I mean, that's unequivocal in terms of the vanity play. The social media is designed to be addictive, dopamine pushing, hooks you in, and then your kids validating their lives off something that doesn't even exist, like this web of people that aren't even with you, judging you, and they fall into the trap of using that as their sort of entire validation mechanism, which I think is disgusting and extremely dangerous. The problem is that this got thrust into the world overnight, essentially. And fortunately, I left school before it all took off. So I avoided it through my adolescence and probably helped me remain steadfast in what we're talking about. But I see how kids get sucked in. And I hate to say it, but a lot of that comes down to the parents' negligence in blocking them from even using it. Because I don't think there's a world where an adolescent using social media is good unless it's rigorously controlled. And that's not talked about enough because we've slipped into these laws because the suicide rates go up, because cyberbullying goes through. And I'm not denying that the cases in those areas have risen and there is a lot of damage to the youth. But that's all propagated by not talking about the source of the problem. It's like, no, go use it. It's all good. And I think there needs to be not control around whether or not we go, you can or can't use it. There needs to be more impetus on the parents to go, look, I've been given the first 10 years with my kid. Have I orientated them well enough to handle this? That's the better question. As you said, sticks and stones can break my bones, but words will never hurt me. I had that at the playground as well. And if you're not thick-skinned enough and you're not prepared for the world and you don't have something higher, like a higher purpose than a few nasty things, and you're not fragile, or you are fragile, then you're probably going to get sucked up and get pretty damaged if you fall into that vortex. And when you come out when you're 17 or 18 and your whole world just depends on how many likes you get, how many reshares you get, you're in big trouble.
I take your point that, that there is cyberbullying out there and in the social media space, and that teens and people in those spaces are being harmed by that, and there are suicides happening. I'm not denying that at all. I'm looking at, let's look at what, like you're saying, what's the deeper issue behind the problem. Guns are dangerous. Now, if you're a farmer and you live out west and you've got a gun and you also have a child, how do you protect the child from that gun? You don't throw the gun away. What you do is you teach the child about guns, about gun safety. In the same way, if social media, if a child using social media is potentially harmful, then, well, one, don't allow your child access to social media until they're old enough and mature enough to know how to use it, and then teach them how to use it safely. I mean,
that's a fantastic point. The gun point is the best analogy and metaphor for how to nurture someone into it.
There's 350 million guns in the hands of private citizens in the US. I lived in the US for 10 years. You know, a lot of my friends, nurses I worked with, had loaded guns in the glove compartment of their car. Now, there's not a whole lot of mishaps happening. I mean, they all go to the range occasionally and learn how to gun safety and how to fire those guns. And I'm not anti-gun. So if you've got something that's potentially dangerous, I don't need the government protecting me from that or my child from that. I'll protect my child. My main role as a man is to protect women and children. If I'm not doing that, I'm stealing oxygen, right? So I am. And so I've just got this 8-week-old daughter, and I'm like, okay, I've got to really look at what are the threats to my child. And the threats to my child are that she can't think, she's not allowed to think freely, that she's not allowed to speak freely. I'm like, well, no, that's not happening to my child. My child's education, being told what to think, is also a threat to her. And if social media is a threat to her, then it's my job, not the government's, to protect her from that. My little girl won't be getting a phone or access to social media till she's at least a teenager, and possibly something like 16. I don't know yet. We're not there, but my partner and I have spoken about this. And then if she does get access to a phone and social media, she'll be given the tools to protect herself. But by that point, she's going to be smart enough and wise enough where and where not to go in that social media space. So I take your point that parents abdicate responsibility for this and then complain, oh, my child's now a victim of bullying because I thought the government should be doing something about it.
Exactly.
It's not the government's job to raise our children or to protect our children from bullying.
It's your job.
And primarily the father. The mother too. Mothers are fierce protectors of their offspring. And so I think the government are overreaching by trying to give us all these protections that we're not really asking for. And I take your point that the onus is on the private citizens' parents, basically.
Yeah.
What do you do if there's kids out there without parents and who's protecting them?
Well, that's another
issue. But primarily I think that it goes back to my point that you don't make people safe by protecting them from threats. You make them safe by teaching them how to confront those threats head on and deal with them. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's the parents that have been co-opted by the system, really, that negligence will take place. And I'm not saying it's good or I'm not, it's very sad, in fact, that happens. But that's the reality, is that your obligation is to protect and nurture and give the tools to orientate and navigate the world accordingly. That's all you can do as a parent.
Yeah.
But when you've got governments that are constantly making life easier, more comfortable, and particularly around, and this is why it's interesting chatting with you, because my dad and mum are similar age to you, but they're very entrenched in the boomer sort of modality. They like what the government provided them. My mum was a migrant from Serbia, so a bit different. She was from sort of war-torn, tough family, and they had to fight tooth and nail to set themselves up here. But in doing so, back then, it was good. Cost of living was easy. You get a house, it's bloody, what do you got? Like a year's salary you can combine with someone and you pay it off. It's pretty cruisy. It wasn't hard. So in my one of my mentors actually said this to me, because I was so upset one day that mum couldn't see the things the way I saw them. And he said, look, Nathan, you got to understand that things worked out pretty good for your mum and your dad. They didn't come from much. They worked hard. The government didn't really intervene all that much either. And they navigated things pretty well. And then they sent you to a great school and their job's sort of done and they're happy. So they just want you to reap the same rewards. But they don't see how different things are now and how calculated things have been all along, I would argue. So, yeah, it's interesting. And it's refreshing to talk to someone like you, Pete, because you obviously see the world I see it, the way I see it. but you've come from an era where I would argue it's disproportionate. There's probably a lot more free thinkers my age than there are your age, which is refreshing.
I think I'm a baby boomer. I had a young guy, I don't know, millennial, 21-year-old, told me that all the world's problems are the baby boomers' fault, that my generation are to blame for all the world's problems. I kind of didn't really take him up on that or know what his point was about, but I think there is that conversation in the background that we screwed it for everybody.
Oh, I'm not saying that at all, by the way. No. I don't buy into that.
Yeah.
I think it was well and truly co-opted well before baby boomers as well. So
yeah, and it's not even generational. It's deeper.
Yeah, it's way deeper
than when you're born. So the other thing is that things were good. I remember when I was growing up as a teenager, things felt pretty good. I felt safe. We used to run around the neighbourhood and come home after dark. Nobody was trying to protect me or anything. I was out there exploring the world. I would fall off trees and break my arms and fall off.
Where did you grow up?
Perth.
Perth,
in WA, yep, in the 60s. And so the police, whenever they'd pull you over, when I first got my licence, it was always a warning first. It was never just a fine. There were no hidden cameras catching you. Like they had to actually catch you speeding, and then if they did, they'd kind of let you off and say, look, maybe slow down. The world felt freer. I always felt like there was a lot of opportunity. Like you said, my father bought our family home for $12,000 and did a major renovation, adding 4 bedrooms onto it for $3,000. That probably wouldn't buy you the curtains today. And so definitely the value of money's gone down. So the world was more relaxed back then. But in between then and now, what I think's happened, and I think you mentioned this point, is that we have had it too good in Australia. We've had 2 very successful back-to-back mining booms that protected us from, recessions like the 2008 crash. The Australian economy stayed strong through all that, through all those, where other countries, I think we had the best performing economy for a long time in the world. We weren't the richest country, but the best performing.
Proportionally, yeah.
Yeah, proportionately. And so we have had it very well here in terms of financial, material things. And so I think we've become very complacent and very soft in our thinking, because if there's no problems to address and everything's pretty cruisy, you get lulled into this complacency that everything's going to always be okay. And, next thing you know, there's a pandemic and the government's telling people what to think and what to do about it. And so I want to touch on the pandemic for a moment. I know going in this territory is very, you've got to step carefully, but I'm committed to speaking freely and thinking freely around this and not censoring myself, because that's the other thing I've noticed, is that if I'm censoring myself, then I've got no business
preaching this stuff,
preaching to the government not to pass censoring laws if I'm censoring myself. And I have been censoring myself. I'm like, what's going on there? Oh, I don't feel safe to speak my truth. What sort of a culture are we creating where a person doesn't feel safe to speak their truth and start self-censoring?
That's what they want.
That's what they want. That's what they want. Who's they? Well, people say, who's they? Who's this they you're talking about? Well, we can actually give names and faces to those. It's the people that are wanting to pass these bills. So if the current government, the current Prime Minister is pushing through the disinformation, misinformation bill, if he's putting his name to that, then he's part of the they. The E-Safety Commissioner, she's part of the they that wants us not to free think or free speak. So we're starting to identify who the they are.
Yeah, I'd say they're the
superficial.
They're the ones in front of the camera. But
correct.
The ones actually pulling the strings, that's a deeper rabbit hole.
They're in Davos and other.
The Bilderberg Group.
Are you curious about how working with your shadow can improve your life and your relationships? Every Tuesday night at 6 p.m, I host a confidential live Q&A call where you can ask questions, access resources, and receive personal coaching from me. I have so many people come to me ready to do their shadow work, but they tell me they just can't afford the financial investment of one of my programs. So, to make professional shadow work accessible to as many of you as possible, I've created the Shadow Work Academy. The Academy is an online space where you get instant access to my inspired community of like-minded individuals, doing the work and taking full responsibility for their lives. You'll have the opportunity to hear other members' stories and share your own. Within the community, you can post your questions, challenges, and breakthroughs, as well as seek professional support and guidance from me personally on the live weekly call. Within the Academy, you'll also find my men's sexual mastery course called The Sexual Samurai and my introductory level shadow work course, Shadowboxing Level 1. Access to the Academy is 100% free until December 24. If you join before then, your access will be free for life.
I think the COVID thing is a really important point to touch on. I think it's even more important now that we're 3-4 years removed and we've actually got so much literature and unequivocal evidence to support the instinct that we felt during the time. And that's why it's better to talk now, because then, well, you couldn't even talk then. You try and talk about how you felt, you just gone. But now there's not much they can do because there's literature and there's unequivocal evidence. The thing one of the best ones I was looking into, and Brett Weinstein very eloquently talked about it, was how it all manifested in the first place with the mRNA vaccines. Now, I was naive to this until only recently, that the mRNA vaccines were a completely new technology that didn't even exist. They weren't in the protocol prior.
Correct.
And it's a multi-trillion-dollar industry that they're now going to start thrusting into the world that they couldn't pass through without rigorous testing, FDA approval, and all the other bodies around the world, unless there was some kind of emergency. We had that emergency, and that's how they got to push this technology through, generating enormous wealth for the technologies that got picked. But it gets a lot deeper and darker. What he was asserting in the podcast with Joe, and I did a lot of reading afterwards, there's a few aspects to it. The first, which sort of gives you the idea of what might be the broader agenda, is that in those mRNA vaccines, the Moderna and the Pfizer, if you had 2 or more shots, you will now, 2 years removed, or roughly 2, it's been two or more years, will start to produce in your body, and I might butcher some of this, but you can look into it for yourself, it's in the literature, this thing called IgG4, which attacks, and you're probably privy to this, it attacks your immune system. So it intentionally, this mRNA technology, the biotechnology, has implanted this into our bodies, or into the people that had it, to now suppress the immune system. But why? You go, well, why is this now popping up in the literature? Why does this exist? And why do these people start suffering really bad effects from trivial illnesses after the fact? Well, as he asserts, and I find super fascinating, that during that time when the pandemic first came out, there was a number of Japanese companies trying to produce self-replicating mRNA technology. So I don't know the science too much, but this technology basically reproduces itself on demand, like a little nanobot, basically. And this is about to be pushed through next year, they think, from Japan. They weren't the front runners. They missed out last time. But the agenda, I think, what Brett was alluding to and what I sort of pieced together, is that the first COVID run through was a little taste tester. They've suppressed a huge chunk of the population's immune system because in the globalist agenda, depopulation is one of their primary sort of modalities. They want to push towards depopulating because they think we're killing the earth. So the next time something comes along, like a new pandemic or a new illness, when they've coerced us all into having faith with all the global problems and we need the global government, well, then you're going to have to get this new technology. And at that point, who knows what it could do? But it's scary to think about because I believe it's all stitched together. I don't believe in coincidences. It's always a part of a bigger plan. And the fact that so many people in the world now have suppressed, compromised immune systems, they're vulnerable and they're reliant and compliant. You know, they're there for the taking, which is frightening. So I thought it was important to touch on that because beyond the obvious civil liberties that were removed and how tough that time was, that is stuff that's come to light recently that I think is important to thrust out there. Whether it gets out there or not, we don't know. But I found it super fascinating because I think there's a broader agenda at play.
It's very interesting 4 years, and I take your point that the mRNA shot had to change the definition of vaccine for it to actually fit that definition. So before that, all vaccines were attenuated or dead viruses or bacteria that were put into, injected into you, and then your immune system recognised those antigens as a threat and then created antibodies. So they used weakened or dead microbes to boost your immune system. This was the first time that they putting in genetic material into your body to get your own cells to produce the spike protein that then your body was going to build an immune system against the spike protein. So this is actually a genetic experiment. You have to call it a genetic experiment. Anything you're doing for the first time.
Well, it's nanotechnology.
Is an experiment, and so they changed the definition. The WHO changed the definition of vaccine during the pandemic. They also changed the definition of herd immunity during the pandemic. So they're just starting to play with the language to create a whole new landscape and to push these mRNA shots, genetic experiments through as the new way to deal with infectious disease. And, we've got to go back and say, well, hang on, the origin of COVID wasn't a bat, and that it's pretty accepted now and undisputed that it came from a lab in Wuhan and that they were doing gain of function. So it's a man-made or at least man-synthesized pathogen. And gain of function means to make something more pathogenic. And so then it escaped the lab, and next thing you know, we've been giving this genetic experiment to combat this new global threat. Recently, they've found that there's even been DNA, human DNA contaminants within some of the vials of the vaccine that are like orders of magnitude beyond what's safe or acceptable. The other thing that's very interesting in terms of the emergency powers in pushing through the COVID vaccines is that they use the TGA to approve these. Now, if it was a vaccine, then the TGA would be the right body to issue that approval. But as it's not a vaccine, it's actually a genetic experiment. There's another body other than the TGA that governs whether genetic things can be approved in this country, and they're the ones that approve GMO organisms and these kind of things. So they used the incorrect, licensing body to push these things through, and that's why they changed the definition to vaccine, because it's not a vaccine, it's a genetic experiment. So in that case, it wasn't even really legally licensed to be done. I'm not sure if people are aware of that. I'm not sure of the name of the body, but it's something to do with an Australian government body that authorises the use of genetic organisms or genetic medicines. So, there's a lot about it that's very shadowy. There's stuff going on behind the scenes. People are encouraged to accept the mainstream narrative. The moment you question the mainstream narrative, you are considered a conspiracy theorist. the other thing around this is that during that time, during that 4 years, what I noticed, the things that I noticed that really stood out for me was that on the nightly news, and I don't really watch TV that much, but during that time I wanted to see what the conversations were. You would expect that if there was this really dangerous pathogen circulating the world and that we needed a response to it, you would think you would have the top virologists, immunologists, vaccinologists, infectious disease doctors sitting around a forum debating what to do about it. But that's not what I saw. No. I saw premiers, I saw chief health officers, I basically saw politicians and bureaucrats on the TV every night. So these are politicians and bureaucrats, and some of these chief health officers have never treated a patient in their life. They're, public health bureaucrats. They might have a medical degree, but they don't treat patients. And then they're telling doctors how to treat patients. And I'm like, that's odd. And then I remember seeing Jacinda Ardern, the New Zealand Prime Minister, saying live on TV, trust the New Zealand government. It's the only source of truth. Mm. And then you hear this other thing thrown out there, trust the science. So
that's calculated.
So I know, but my point is that I don't know where you are in terms of belief.
Faith.
I
have recently become faith. Very
same
faithful.
With me.
Yeah.
I've more recently have faith and belief in a higher power. And I don't know if there's a higher power or not. No one does. But the reason I'm choosing to have faith in a higher power, because the moment you take God away, what's left? Government and science. So if you get rid of God, now they're going to ask you to put faith in science and faith in politics. That's a recipe for disaster. And the way I see the hierarchy or the structure of, if there is a intelligent creator, they're at the top. And then comes man, and then comes government. If there's a hierarchy, because if God creates man and man creates government, that should be the way that hierarchy works. So it's up to man, the people. We reign over the government, not the other way around. But and in my lifetime, this has turned around significantly, in that the balance of power is shifting away from the private citizen to these governments, and the governments are getting more and more power, and they're writing more and more laws. And the more laws they write, the more likely you are to break one, right? And so this is the situation we find ourselves in, and there's even, I think there's there's more people turning to faith now, but over the last decade or two, particularly in Western countries, people have been throwing God out and throwing their faith out, and then told to put faith in these institutions of politics and science.
But it's also, that's the faith point, again, a great metaphor for what's going on. The faith aspect in a religion is all we really have beyond a material purpose that can keep us grounded. And what I mean by that is, if your purpose is, make family happy, be here for family, well, what happens if a catastrophe occurs and you don't have family anymore? Well, then your purpose is removed. We need to I would urge, to keep a faith in some form of higher power, because it's beyond human, it's beyond the realm of rational. And nothing can touch that. No government. Your faith can't be touched by a government. It can't be touched by an organization. It can't be touched by other individuals if you have that steadfast belief. And that's what sort of really brought me back into faith recently. But there's no coincidence as well. Like all these things, these themes we're touching on. Another big theme is the attack on Christianity and the attack on Jesus, the mocking of him in the West, the indoctrination of our kids in the Disney shows, and the more satanic themes that are across the fashion industry and through Hollywood and through, your Epstein-like characters and the Diddy-like characters. These things that have been manifesting for years and years and years behind closed doors, and then on the surface in the programming and the material that our kids or future kids have watched, and me as a child have watched, and the media that they push through in movies, there's no coincidence that all these pillars of trying to degrade and destroy the conventional framework of faith in Christ and faith in a higher power, a good power, are being undermined. It's being undermined, in my opinion, very intentionally. And that's also why we have so many people turning back to it. You know, people that are good-hearted, people that have maybe gone off the rails, that have come back and gone, hang on, this isn't working. You know, this doesn't resonate. I need to, what is it that, and maybe they don't know how to logically bring themselves back to that conclusion, but they end up there. And it profoundly changes them. I mean, it profoundly changed me. And I probably wouldn't be able to completely rationalize why I arrived at that point, but you almost arrive at that point because that's what's right.
My journey with faith started, I was raised Catholic. For about the first 17 years, I went to Catholic church, and some days I went every day. I was an altar boy. I went to a Catholic school, kind of had Jesus rammed down my throat, and, you know, I was taught to believe in God the Father, you know, and my father was a bit of a bully. He was a violent alcoholic and used to take to me with the belt quite frequently, and so there was a bit of cognitive dissonance in me in terms of seeing God as a father. So God the Father and seeing my father, I'm like, I can't see this God, I can't feel him. I was told that if I, you know, took the bread and the wafer and closed my eyes, I would see Jesus. That didn't happen. So at 17, I kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater and said, I'm done with Catholicism. And I don't think I'm the only person that's done that. Then in my 30s, or late 20s, early 30s, I got into yoga and meditation and almost went down like more of a Buddhist Hindu kind of philosophy around consciousness as the higher power, higher consciousness. And I spent a good 20 years doing deep meditation and had what I'd call kind of spiritual experiences. But I didn't relate to the deities like Ganesh and these kind of Hanuman and these kind of Hindu gods. And then I spent another 15 years in psychedelic plant medicines and encountered what seemed to be spiritual realms. And so I've always been on a search looking for what can I put my faith in. And it's been an interesting journey, all those different paths. And just recently, I'm coming full circle back around to kind of my Catholic roots, and I don't relate to a personification of God. I think we tend to anthropomorphize God as that he's a man or an old guy with a beard sitting up in the clouds. That I don't relate to that. I see God as an all-encompassing absolute truth that is pure consciousness and that's blissful, you know, and that's Sat Chit Ananda in the yoga sense. So I have a faith in a higher power now, and so the two ways I got to here recently, one is through recognizing that when you throw God out, who become your authorities? What's the higher power? And I'm noticing that what I'm being told is, well, put your faith in science and put your faith in politics. They're very scary places to put your faith. You know, look at the eugenicists and look at what was done in fascist Germany when they were conducting the government were conducting scientific experiments on prisoners, and, you know, doing surgical mutilations. And interesting, that's coming around again, surgical mutilations. And so if we give up a higher power, we've only got science and politics left. And so I'm like, nope, I'm going back to this higher power and I'm going to aim higher. And I'm not going to put my faith in politics and science. Then the other thing that happened recently was when my partner got pregnant. And the moment I saw that bump, I get it. This is not my child. This is not our child. I'm not clever enough to make a human inside another human. I can barely balance my monthly budget. I can't make a human. And so I can donate the seed, and my partner donated the egg, but the rest is a complete mystery and miracle. So I started to see just spontaneously that this is God's child. coming from God through us into the world, from the supernatural into the natural. That's what natural means. N-A-T for natural, is your name. Nat means to be born. So everything is nature.
Yeah, Nathan means gift from God in Hebrew, I think.
Does it? Okay, yeah, well, there you go. So children are a gift from God. And so me becoming a father also prompted this renewal of my faith in something greater than man. And I think we need something greater than man so that we can aim up. Because if that's not there and man's the highest thing, then we're going to be putting our faith in men. And I don't know about you, but I'm not willing to do that.
No. I think it's a beautiful story. And I think for someone like me and for a lot of listeners that don't have kids yet, it's tough to relate yet, but you could have sort of, you want to feel that emotion that you felt. But I for me, it was more unexplainable moments where you go, there's no way that could possibly happen by chance. Things that just go, you know, the odds of this, and this, there's no way that could possibly happen.
Do you have an example?
Oh, I mean, it's tough because you won't be able to relate to the exact example. But on a more micro scale, everyone has their own. There might be people out there go, yeah, no, I did have one of them, but most people will dismiss them. And that's the biggest problem. They'll dismiss them as chance or coincidence. You have a choice in that moment to go, that was something more. What was that? And you do a bit more searching. And then I think the most articulate way I've seen it broken down recently as to how to get into faith was by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He went on a podcast recently. I love a lot of the stuff he stands for and the work he does, and I think he's a terrific guy. He, as he's been very public about, went through a big heroin addiction until his late 20s.
I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, huge heroin addict. He came out of school, or during school, he very unsettled. He couldn't focus. He obviously went through immense trauma with his uncle and his father being killed. Became a bit rebellious, got into heroin, and then he actually became a functioning heroin addict through his late teens all the way through till his late 20s, and graduated law school, literally would be high in class, and the heroin actually allowed him to work. Like, he would use it as his medicine, which is crazy. I mean, it's worth listening to him explain it. But he obviously got to a point where he couldn't do that anymore. You know, he needed to shift. And he liked his reading, but he first read this book. The first thing that changed him, much like the Graham Hancock thing for me, was a book called Synchronicity by Carl Jung, which I've also read. And it talks about this concept of moments that happen that you cannot explain. And Carl actually, he actually tried to prove this scientifically. So he went out and actually tried to prove that through, you know, a sample of people, if I could get X amount of these moments, how can I measure it and try and prove this out? I don't think he ever actually proved it out, but he talks about this in this book. And Bobby talks about how this somehow cracked through for him. And in that moment, he didn't know how he was going to start to attach to faith, but that book alone was the only thing that stopped him from taking drugs anymore. He had done rehabs. He had done all kinds of things to try and break his addiction. The only thing that stopped it was that book. It cracked through at a core level that he couldn't explain. And then he didn't know what to do in terms of, should I go to church? Should I go to, you know, Bible study? What do I do? And then he had a friend tell him, and this is what I resonated with the most, and I've kind of come to faith the last probably year and a half in particular. I go over to the Hinterland Chapel out at Eureka probably once or twice a month, which is really, really good. And his friend told him that you need to look at everything that happens in your day as decisions. Now, God will test you every day. If you wake up and you don't make your bed, you've failed the first test. If there's a sock on the floor and you don't put it away neatly in your drawer, you've failed that test. If you leave a dish in the sink, you've failed that test. You have probably 100 micro tests a day. And if you start to tick a lot of those tests and believe that God is with you and you're fulfilling God's word, the higher power, whatever you want to call it, you will start to realize just how in touch you are and at one you are with the higher power. And that funnels into, you can talk about synchronicity in terms of, why you get a call from someone that you haven't talked to in 20 years and you thought about them the other day and how interconnected we are. That's probably a little bit of a side tangent. But all of these small, manageable decisions will allow you to be way more in tune with the more profound things that happen and know that God's got you. That's what I really resonated with. And I was like, that makes so much sense. So I stick with that. And, it served me good so far.
Yeah, I like that. I'm a big fan of Jung. I haven't read the book Synchronicity, but I know what he refers to in regards to synchronicity, what other people might call coincidences. And you say, well, no, they're not coincidences, way deeper than that. And I've certainly had those kind of experiences in my life where I've noticed uncanny coincidences that I now call these things synchronicity. I'm having one going on at the moment. Started when my partner got pregnant, but before our baby was born, I started to see 444 all the time. So I'd wake up in the morning. I generally get up around 4:30 anyway, but I just look at my computer or my phone or the clock, whatever, I'd see 444. And that doesn't mean anything the first couple of times you see it, but then I notice in the afternoon, I'm just happening to be driving in my car, I look at the clock for the only time on that drive and it's 4:44. As it's going on and on and on, I'm like, okay, this is not,
what does it mean?
This is not chance. I didn't know what it meant, so I just kind of Googled 444. And so when you see three numbers in a row, they call them the angel numbers. And 4 in particular is kind of shaped like an angel might be shaped, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I just keep seeing 444 everywhere, 444 everywhere. These are called the angel numbers. The 4 looks like an angel, and an angel's have just arrived in my life, my little daughter from God. And so this is what I'm making it mean. I guess we have to add our own, well, we do. We add our own meaning to everything. Humans are meaning-making machines, if they're anything. And so I looked it up and somebody said, somebody else made it mean that these are angel numbers. And it's still going on. I'm still seeing 444 twice a day, most days.
Yeah.
Which is uncanny.
Absolutely.
Now, some people might think I'm a fruitcake or this or that, but I don't really care. I'm making that mean that for me, that has restored my idea in faith. Interesting, the thing on Jung trying to prove the synchronicity thing, I don't think we need to or even want to prove the existence of God, because then you won't need faith if we have proof. And I think that's why maybe we're not given proof of God, is because you wouldn't need faith. And I think we need faith. And I think that's why more and more people are turning to faith, because we're in dark times. I believe we're in dark times. In, 40 days' time now or less, 30 days' time, I think the biggest decision in our life, certainly in mine, is about to be made in terms of the US election. I know you follow US politics pretty closely. Me and my partner, we pay way more attention to US politics than we do to Australian, because if America sneezes, Australia catches a cold. And so whatever happens there, and it's, and I'm surprised how many of my friends or people I talk to, average Australians, have no idea. They don't even know there's a problem with the southern border in the US. They know what's going on. They know there's a war in the Middle East and in Ukraine, but the real war, the real invasion, like America's being invaded. They've had something like 15 million people cross their southern border while their troops are overseas. Their troops should be down on the southern border stopping the invasion of America. And so there's a big, I know you follow US politics. How big do you think that election is, and what two different scenarios do you foresee depending on the result? Because for me, it's chalk and cheese, and I don't know if the world can I don't know if the America, firstly, or the world can withstand another 4 years of the current regime.
Yeah, it's a complex one to unpack, but one that I have spent far too many hours unpacking in my head. I think where to start with this question is to look at where other countries are actually heading. And that's where I want to set the stage. Because America, destiny's in their hands. They either get on the boat or they get left behind. And honestly, you will see the fall of the US as a Western powerhouse. So behind the scenes, you've got the BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. But you've got tons more joining it and have joined it. Turkey, all these people. They've been building for, the last sort of 15 years, accumulating gold, setting up their own trade agreements, setting up their own cryptocurrency routes so that they can bypass tariffs. They're going to go on with this new world without the US if they have to. They've been undermining the US dollar. The US dollar is just so overinflated and useless in many respects, backed by backed by petrol and fucking oil, and it's crumbling before our eyes. It's only propped up by printing money, and treasury bonds, etc. And you've got two options. You've got Trump wins. He's very economy focused. So I can see a world where, of course, the immigration issues get patched up if he gets in. Can he fix the $35 trillion of debt that they have? I have some personal beliefs that there might be a route that he could do that through certain crypto assets. But the big thing for him will be getting on that ship. The ship is there. He knows what's going on behind closed doors with these trade agreements, and that's why he's launched the Liberty Fund, his own digital asset-backed financial system that he can give power back to the people, but also, I don't know the inner workings yet because he hasn't released it all, but I suspect he can then plug into this new system that the BRICS are going to start running with to bypass a lot of the economic barriers that are in place now. So if he wins, we see things stabilize, broadly speaking. We see them tap into the new system. We hopefully see war get nipped in the bud. Not overall. I mean, Iran just slung 200 rockets overnight. Israel just invaded Lebanon, so I don't know where that's all going to go. But he's the best hope we have for settling the world on a conflict front, because he had a peaceful 4 years the first time he was there. We can start to see him hopefully drop, crime rates and protect women most of all. Like, they're the one. Women and children are the most vulnerable they've ever been in the US. They're fearful to walk down the street. There's illegal aliens and criminals running across the border, and it's absolute chaos. Now, if he wins, I think a lot of those things get nipped in the bud. However, we don't actually know what the reaction will be from the radicalized leftists that have completely too far gone, in my opinion.
Yeah.
They might incite extreme violence and
they've done it
things.
before.
They've done it before, but they can barely handle their own emotions, let alone equip a gun or fight off, proper men. So I don't worry too much about that. But he is a very antagonistic, provocative kind of figure, and it will incite some sort of reaction. I know that much. If Kamala wins, well, then we have a large problem, because she fuels and feeds directly into the globalist agenda. The ties to your WFs, the Bilderberg groups, all the organizations that are really sort of the shadowy organizations that are pulling the strings, so to speak. They have her tied up, and they have the Democratic Party tied up. You see how relentless they are at preserving their wealth. You've got your Bill Gateses, you've got Zuckerberg's kind of come around a little bit, but all these people that are in the big organizations that are part of the 2030 agenda, the UN setup that they want, the depopulation, you'll have certain amount of carbon credits, you'll have a digital currency on a universal basic income every month. That will get that whole theme of moving towards the thing you and I are most fearful of, gets accelerated. It gets ramped up.
Yep.
The censorship controls, the bills passed, the potentially outlaw of guns, the obliteration of key constitutional pillars in the US get brought into question that they've been pushing for so long. That is all on the cards if that happens. I mean, I'm not saying Trump's a saint, and I'm not saying that he's there's not flaws there. It's a different chat. But I've mapped that out, and I've mapped out what will happen with her, and everything gets accelerated with her. And something I talk a lot about, sort of, I don't talk it verbally much, but in my investigative pieces that I do on Instagram, I insinuate the importance of getting your head around utility-based crypto assets over the next, now, because the importance of them in the next financial system that they're about to roll out, with Trump or without Trump, is paramount, or pro-civil liberty or not pro-civil liberty, because digital assets can be used for good. It's decentralized finance for a reason. If the frameworks were set up by the right leadership, it's giving power back to the people, to manage your money, less taxation, easier to move merchant to consumer, merchant to merchant, business to business. There is the framework there for a much more prosperous world in terms of finance. But the other side want to use it for control, and they want to move you towards UBI, and they want autonomy over your assets. They want to tokenize your house on certain ledgers. They want to tokenize your carbon credits. And as you said earlier today, why is the climate change such a big thing? Highlight the global problem, fix it. How do we fix it? We go, all global citizens, you have a certain amount of carbon credits you can utilize a month. If you go over, it's deducted from your UBI. That's how they want to run it. And when you read all these crazy documents and how entrenched they already are, these big companies, one of them is Ripple, and they own the digital asset XRP. There's another one, XDC. There's XLM. There's a litany of them. They're the big ones. They're poised either way. They've hedged their bets. They're entrenched in BRICS. They're entrenched in the US, and they've got people in the WEF. They've got people on the other side. They have got all bases covered, no matter which way we go. You go civil liberty, you go, pro deregulated finance, all that sort of stuff, good stuff. Or you go down this way, we're all set. So what I've been trying to tell people, and I can't give financial advice, of course, and it's not financial advice, but it's something I've done and I'm just sharing, is really go deep on that and understand that this could be the best way to set yourself up no matter what happens. If you've got your faith and you've backed the best horse as we move away from an old financial system into a new one, you're safe as a citizen, in my opinion. That's what all my research is boiled down to, because it's all connected, geopolitically, philosophically, even astrologically. This is all boiling down to a complete overhaul of finance, because we know the central banks pretty much run the world, or the people that run the central banks or control them run the world. They're the ones that control fiscal policy. They're the ones who then pull on the strings of the puppeteers in government, and whatever they're trying to, and then they protect the certain companies and organizations that they have interests in. You've got to get this right, is what I'm saying. For people that are trying to navigate this tricky time, do your research, understand it, and know that there's one chance at really strong wealth accumulation if you put your eggs in the right basket. That's my solid belief. That's what I've done. And your bets are hedged. You can't lose in that one. You can't lose because you're betting on something bigger than politics, and you're betting on something that the world is already doing, the BRICS. So that would be my assessment of where we go. Definitely the much, much lesser of two evils, Trump. I think there's a lot of good there. Mm-hmm. And that's the landscape. Long-winded, but that's how I see it playing. That's how I see it playing out, but I want my bets hedged, and that's what I've done.
I like that. And, yeah, it's always good to have a solution-based conversation, because we've been looking at all the problems. But how do you position yourself in this current landscape? I know that Kamala Harris, you might be able to tell me this because I think you've researched into her. Is her father a professor of economics and particularly in Marxist philosophy?
He is. True, yep. But that's even in question now.
Okay.
I mean, I don't even know. I don't know if you've been watching. You should watch Candace Owens.
I've watched some of her stuff.
She's been covering it, and it all started when a few weeks ago, I did a video on this referencing of black. She keeps getting she's changing her accent, and all of a sudden it's like the media have just, since she took over Joe Biden, this narrative of like she's black. Like, where's this come from? Hang on, I thought she was half Indian, and it was pretty low key. So then I put out this video of there's a website called the Wayback Machine where you can go and view web pages from whatever year you want. I thought it was just like it was an idea that literally just talked about synchronicity. I was in bed one night and just went bing, said, you should look at an old web page, Wikipedia, and see how often they reference her being black. And I bet you it's a lot less than now. So I went back and I looked it up, and all this old web wiki page from like 2013. I cross-checked it up to like 2015, so not that long ago. All Indian. All Indian. And then you go to now, and there's like 30 references. Black. And you go, what? Why is this? What's going on here? Obviously, they're pushing the race narrative for votes. So that was what I insinuated. It went really, really well, went viral. That was partly why I got onto Alex Jones's show. And then I did another piece on this key power broker, shadowy figure that kind of pulls the strings. But then it got even crazier because Candace Owens went into a book and found this photo of her Jamaican grandmother. Have you seen this?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, and it's now crystal clear that she's lying about her paternal grandmother. It also was found that this Beryl Harris, who was her paternal grandmother by name but not by skin colour, we don't know her skin colour, had Donald, her father. But the only birth record, we don't have a birth record of Donald. We only have a death record. And the death record was signed by Beryl Harris in 1939, a year after Donald was born. So now Candace is questioning whether Donald is even her father. And then we now know as well there's this grandmother. We pretty much found her grandmother, this white lady called, her nickname was Iris, but her name was Vioris McPherson. And she married Camilla's legitimate grandfather, Oscar Harris. He was Jamaican, but he married Vioris, who was, white as snow. And they've then, we theorise, maybe had Donald, but maybe not, because we don't know if Donald's actually tied to that. And then you question it all. You're like, well, all we know is you've lied about your grandmother. So what's going on there? And these are the types of people that are trying to run for US president. It's like, this is unbelievable. In this day and age, to try and pull that off and to not think that someone's going to find it, it's either the most stupid thing you've ever done, or it's just like you just don't care because you know you're going to win or something. I don't know.
They say never put down to malevolence what can be explained by stupidity. But I think there's stupidity and malevolence. Probably. Yeah, both, I had seen some of that stuff. And, again, like clearly there's deception going on there. And, they're deceiving you with one hand and then with the other hand telling you trust the government. But clearly they're untrustworthy. And why do they keep telling us to trust them? After so many requests to create a more affordable alternative to shadowboxing mastery, I've created Shadowboxing Level 1, a 5-week introductory program focused on the foundations of shadow work and how to apply this in any area of your life. Whether you're a therapist, a coach, or just someone with a passion for self-development, this program will equip you with the principles, the tools, and the know-how to achieve life-changing breakthroughs for yourself and or your clients on a daily basis. Using my proven method, Shadowboxing Level 1 teaches you the skills to create satisfying and lasting intimate relationships, reconcile past traumas, improve health and well-being, manage addictive behaviour patterns, and much more. Head to my website at isaiahcoaching.com or check out the show notes to find out more. The other thing about Kamala is she is pro equity of outcome.
Yeah. Shocking. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not attainable. It's not
Well,
attainable.
the times they've tried it under Mao Zedong in China and Stalin. I mean, tens of millions of people murdered by their own people. Have you read
Not across that.
Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn? That's a very good read. Basically, equality of outcome means that you take all the goods of production and they all go to a centralised government and then they hand it all out equally to all the people. Basically communism. It's a Marxist concept and idea. And they tried it in Russia and China. And what was happening was there was some of these accounts in the book by Solzhenitsyn. There was these farmers, they were grain growers, and so when they harvested their grain, then the government authorities would show up to take the grain, to the government store. And then if they were found to be picking up a few grains of rice that were left on the sidewalk, they were executed on the spot.
Jesus.
Yeah, so you don't even get to save a few for personal because that's not centralised distribution of product. And he witnessed stuff like this. He was actually in a gulag for about 20 years.
Wow.
I recommend everybody read Gulag Archipelago if you want to know what the threat of a totalitarian system looks like. And a totalitarian system is where you have government control of everything and they distribute resources to everybody apparently evenly. Can't be done. You and I know, but it can't be done. History has evidence of what happens when we even attempt it. So if you're smart, you know that equality of opportunity is certainly something we want to strive for. Equality of outcome is impossible and leads to murderous regimes. And this is what the World Economic Forum is on about. This is what Kamala Harris is on about. It's a Marxist communist thing. And China's in a way already set up for this, aren't they, in terms of the facial identity, the social credit score. If you cross the street and against the red light, they facially recognise you, you lose some points on your social credit score. Now you can't go more than X miles from your home, or you can't get on a plane, or you can't go to this place. So there's this government control of the population through, and like you were saying with the universal basic income and the central bank digital currencies and the digital identity, they're wanting to control all the private population and dictate where you move, 15-minute cities, where you spend your money, how you spend your money, how much carbon you're using, and if you don't have physical money, this is something I don't understand because you touched on this in terms of crypto. So is crypto an antidote to the central bank digital currencies? In other words, if they bring in central bank digital currencies, well, they already have in terms of large bank transfers. Yeah. But if they take cash away and we only have digital bank central currencies, how are cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and XRP, how are they a hedge against that?
Well, XRP it basically produces the rails for CBDCs to be transferred cross-border. So it's like the intermediary. That's the value of the token. That's the value of all these assets I'm talking about. So there's one that handles logistics, ticketing, and messaging. So when you're transporting stuff or big shipping containers, stuff like that. XRP is for finance, and that's what it does. It acts in between fiat currencies. Aussie dollar to Japanese yen, etc., etc. The platform of CBDCs, there's an AUD, AUDD, Australian Digital Dollar, that's been built on the XRP and Stellar network. It's already sort of been done, which is kind of alarming. But they can't run or operate without the token itself. So whether they launch that or not, the CBDC, which I hope they don't, XRP will still act as a rail for traditional movement of money. So if they're not moving it via CBDC and you still want to conduct business and say I want to buy a company in Japan and I need to move $30 billion, XRP can do that instantly. Whereas at the moment, we're still on the old system, which is SWIFT. That transaction's taking weeks, and there's multiple intermediaries and people that have to be cut in to do that. You can also tokenize commodities. So we know through the BRICS that it's very likely we're going to move towards a gold standard again, or a commodity-backed standard, because inflation is cooked. We can't just keep printing money forever. Where does the commodity sit? You can't move gold like that. How do you move it? You move it through XRP. You commoditize assets. So this is the good examples. I'm not with gold trade, moving money, business, that's all good. That runs on those rails. So this is the more benevolent aspect of it, really useful. And if you hold that asset, if you hold those coins, you're getting exposure to the increase of wealth as it starts to roll out, because the value of it can't be cheap to handle those types of wealth transfers or commodity transfers or asset transfers, because houses will be commoditized as well. You'll be able to run, like, you say you own a big property and you want multiple owners. Well, they can buy into a certain chunk of the value through splitting up the XRP, because it can split, one XRP can split into a millionth, one millionth. It's a lot to get your head around, Pete, but I've been in the weeds. So that gives you exposure to traditional commerce, traditional asset movement, and that's where we'll see value growth. The sinister aspect is, well, they'll roll out the CBDCs and then they'll use it for control, and then they'll, the way they move money and stream you money, right? They'll literally be able to stream you money in real time. There won't be, there's another convenient play. They go, well, we make life so good for you. You won't get paid monthly or fortnightly anymore. You'll get your money by the second, because they can do it. They can literally stream you. You can have your bills paid for by the second. So you don't even have to worry about your accounting and finance. It'll all just be handled on the ledger. And that's pretty powerful stuff, and that they can do that. This is all probably going to roll out next year, because there's this ISO compliance that needs to be met. It's like this global standard of ticketing and messaging and money movement that is intended to roll all the institutions off the old SWIFT network, or at least get SWIFT to collaborate to move them towards this new system. And there's only a handful of cryptos that will be used in facilitating that move, so that the world of business and the world of trade and the world of commodity movement can be enhanced, because you're playing their game. They want that too. The elites want that. They want their assets to be more solid. They want wealth accumulation to be easier. They don't want to be wasting their time with old systems. So you're playing into their game and you're getting in before the institutions. That's why I'm so bullish on it, because the institutions have been slowly getting their shit together and integrating it, because it's such an archaic system. Whereas we've actually gotten in first. We couldn't get in, perfect example, we couldn't get into the internet before the internet. The internet just came. And then your Microsofts, your Googles and all that just blew up, and people in the inner sanctum that had shares in that have all become squillionaires. It's the first time in history where retail, if you've got your nous and you figure it all out, you can actually get in before the institutions.
Is XRP a token or a cryptocurrency?
It's a currency, yeah. It's a token.
Token.
Yeah. Much like Bitcoin, but Bitcoin has one Bitcoin obviously worth a mozza, but it doesn't have any utility. It can't be used for anything. They thought they could use it for payments, but it's too slow. It can't handle high transaction limits, and it can't be used as an intermediary between currencies. Like you can't implant Australian dollars and then send it over there and have it transferred instantly, because that the XRP relies on the Interledger protocol, which is Ripple's main infrastructure that they implement in the banks to be able to do this stuff. Bitcoin has none of that. In my humble opinion, it really doesn't have any utility value at all. It's just because there's not many coins. There's 100 billion XRP. There's only 20 million Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is sort of just seen as that store of value, digital gold.
Yeah.
And I think it'll always hold that. But yeah, there's...
So when you say the XRP, so it's like, I guess the analogy the electricity moving through the electricity wires. So it's not the electricity, it's the wires.
It's the plumbing or the wires.
Yeah, so the electricity company produces the electricity, and this is what Thomas Edison did, didn't he? He owned the wiring system, and that's how he made his money. So his XRP, like you say, called the rails.
Yeah.
Is it the technological rails or wires through which these transactions occur? And so it's like the architecture behind through how you move the currency.
Bang on. That's the best metaphor for it. Yeah, it's the plumbing, it's the wires, it's the rails, whatever you want to call it. That's what it does, and you can see it through. It's not just they've got over 1,000 institutions globally on board. They've been entrenching themselves for 15 years. Now, this is a big undertaking. Like when I talk to people that work in banks, one of my friend's partners, she worked on the SWIFT network. She knows how old and archaic it is, but she doesn't understand what they're trying to roll out. But she fully understands the problems it has and how complex it would be to have to overhaul this whole system. It takes a long time, and you've got to have all the big boys on board. You've got to have them up to speed on getting their back-end infrastructure updated. You've got to have them test it all out. You've got to have them then try it all out with real money, which they've been doing the last couple of years, and then finally you can start to roll it out. And that's where this ISO thing comes in. I think they'll all start to flip the switch, so to speak, early in March next year, and then by the end of next year it'll all be rolled out. And whether it's rolled out for good or bad, we don't know yet, but it will be rolled out, and that's why you can hedge yourself against the new system.
That's a big deep dive. I understood about 60% of that, 70%.
Well,
clearly, you've done a lot of research into that, and you're personally backing it. I mean, you're a kind of entrepreneurial guy and an investor, and I mean, you even have US clients. Is that right? Do you have clients that come to you for investment advice or not?
No, I'm not an investment advisor. I don't have the qualification.
You've got your own personal investments.
We've got a company called Cashew, me and my business partner Luca, which is in the investment group. They have an AFSL, which is like an investment license, and they built a proprietary fund, which they tried to sell to institutions, basically just, to manage finances, and it returned like an average of sort of 45% a year, which is really, really, really good.
Same.
Very, very good. But the institutions wanted to see sort of 30 years of results, which is impossible because it's built from machine learning and it's very AI focused, and it's new age. So it only had like sort of 6 years of results. And then they said, look, boys, why don't you go off and we'll give you a bit of money and you turn it into a retail product and give this power to retail investors. Tell them the insights and get them to invest in the right places and kill it. So we built out a product called Cashew, and that's why I'm, tell these stories and business. It's kind of, it's evolved into a bit more than just me telling business stories and finance stories. I'm more entrenched in the political and the geopolitical stuff now. But that's how we've landed where we are. I'm by no means an investment advisor. I'm personally talking about what I feel is a good decision for myself, but definitely do the research. You should do the research and get your head around it. And that's where I've landed. Like, as I said to you, the culmination of my research has landed me there, because ultimately, as you said, we need to, it's all good and well coming up with all the problems.
Yeah.
What's the solution?
Yeah.
And what are the central banks doing? What are the big boys doing? What are Russia doing? What are China doing? Once you piece this huge puzzle together, you realize there is a common purpose. They're all moving towards a new financial system. How can I get a part? How can I get a bit of exposure to that system? And it's hard to commit to it until you fully understand it all, but that's what I've done. So,
yep. I mean, I've been on a similar journey, but at smaller scale than you, in that as probably about a year or 18 months ago, all my money was sitting in the bank, and I just noticed the value of it just declining and declining as inflation went higher and higher. My money's losing value. It's just hemorrhaging value. I got to take my money out of the bank. Where do I put it? I talked to a friend. I bought some crypto.
Oh, you did too?
Yeah, I bought some Bitcoin and some Theta coin, and then I bought some silver bullion. I didn't buy any gold, but I bought silver. I need to kind of diversify where I'm storing my wealth and my value, because it's just losing value in the bank. And so I have very little in the bank now, because money in the bank at the moment with the inflation the way it is just not a good idea.
Yeah, after you get your little 3-4% interest, you can get taxed on that as well, and you're losing money.
Yeah,
it's just pointless. Did you do quite well with the investments in Bitcoin and stuff?
No, because I got in at the highest point.
Right.
So that was only about a year ago, not 18 months ago. I got in when it was like 110,000 for one Bitcoin.
Yeah, right.
It's come down a bit since then.
Yeah.
So I'm down about 15%, but I'm not pulling out.
No.
Silver's gone up. Silver and gold are on the same trajectory and have been.
Silver's been great
for 30 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I'll probably continue to buy some, bullion. So I think bullion's a good way, but I buy it not in kilo blocks, of course, but I want to use it also as a means of transacting, not just as a store of value.
Yeah.
So I buy coins, because I see that I've got to protect and provide for my family, and if the banks are the bank in conjunction with the fiscal policy of the government decreasing the value of our money, then I need to think smarter about just keeping my money in the bank. Just a quick conversation around this too, because I'd like your opinion on this. A couple of things, and I've got these crazy ideas. I don't know how valid they are. So one is the whole pandemic response was a deliberate attack on the middle class. And what I mean by that is that through all the lockdowns and the more the COVID response than COVID itself, there was big blocks in the supply chain. And what the government did was not the government, but the central banks printed a lot of money, lend that money to the government handed out. There was huge handouts going on. I didn't put my hand up for any of it. I didn't want any government handouts during COVID. And so if you print a whole lot of new money and you block the supply of goods, that's the recipe for creating inflation. So you've got a demand for things, but a blocked supply, so price goes up, and then you just hand out the cash, and then the value of cash goes down. And the people who are hurting the most, the people I talk to, are the middle class. And it's like an attack on the middle class, because the wealthy are kind of immune against these kind of things. And, well, the people who are poor, they're kind of relying on government handouts anyway. They're the ones putting their hand up, for the welfare payments during COVID. Mm. And so it's really the middle class who are losing most of their value. A lot of my accumulated value of my lifetime has really declined in the last 4 years. Mm. So that's one thing. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but the other thing that I see happening is that I've owned 3 properties in my life, a house and 2 units. I sold them. I don't hold them anymore. And I made some poor choices in terms of what I did with that. But I couldn't buy a house now if I tried. And I'm in my 60s, People in their 60s generally at the most wealthiest point in their life, usually. I can't afford to buy a house, at least not in Melbourne or Sydney or Brisbane. I mean, what's the average price? It's going to be 1.5, 2 million. So I think there's a deliberate play being made in terms of inflating real estate prices in Australia. And what they're doing, the government is doing, is I think there's about something like 1 million immigrants a year coming in.
We had our biggest one last year. We had 600-something
600,000, all right.
Yeah, which is our biggest ever.
Okay. And I looked at the demographics of that, and the majority of those are people from India and China. And these would be cashed up people from India and China coming into Australia, and they're buying up our real estate. And so that pushes the prices up. You've got blocked supply. It's not like there's a whole bunch of new houses being made.
No.
You increase the demand, you block the supply, you drive up the price, you force the average Australian out of the market, and you import these people from China and India who've got the cash to buy. So that's continuing to raise the prices of real estate in Australia. That's government policy. And, and the average Australian is just not batting an eyelid. If you already own property, you're happy. You're happy about the value of your price, the price of your house going up, the value of your house going up, because you're holding that asset. But what about the younger people who are wanting to buy into the market and just can't get in? Or they do get in and overcommit themselves, and interest rates start to go up like they have done, and then all of a sudden they're in a lot of hot water.
But the truth is, you got no chance. Like, I mean, that's why I have to think outside the box, and that's why I talk about these things, because we hit on a couple of important themes there. The destruction of the middle class is completely intended. Because if they can destroy the middle class and then they can funnel you down to the lower socioeconomic standards, you're going to become way more obedient and you're going to become way more reliant on these handouts. And we saw it during COVID. And I moved into investments. Well, we won't go down that, but I made money. But I had to do it. We have to think outside the box. But back to the destruction of the middle class, completely intended. And it goes back to the point you were making around, what was that book that I hadn't read? The Marxist... the
Gulag Archipelago.
You know, it's all tied into the equality of outcome, the emasculization of man, the destruction of the middle class. It's all interlinked, because if you can destroy a man's will to not be able to provide and cripple their spirit and become reliant on the government, become obedient, then you can achieve the globalist agenda, which is mass control, because there's no resistance in the middle anymore. As you said, the elites are safe, they're happy, they're fine. Like, there's nothing they can do about them, but they're only, what are they, like maybe 3% of the world max? If you funnel everyone into that bottom bucket by emasculating the man, you know, demonizing them for standing up for some of the simple things we just talked about. Like, people would attack us. Some people would attack us for saying we're a waste of breath if we don't protect our children and protect our partner and provide. These inherent primal feelings we're denied of. It's like, hang on a minute, that doesn't make sense. And then you've got this propagation of telling women that you should become more masculine, go into more business-orientated jobs, go into the sciences, do these things that are traditionally more men, or become a tradie. This is it. It's all interlinked. Every facet of it is. And I think the main one is the middle class, because if that falls, all those things crumble as well. They're just sort of side tangents that cut into it. And that's where we find ourselves. And yeah, inflation's rife. It's very hard to afford anything. And that's why I keep coming back to this point, I urge you to think outside the box, because there is a way to win at the game. You just got to understand the game. Inside and out.
Play the game by the way the rules are set up. I think that is the solution. The other point I wanted to make about the real estate bubble is that if houses are $2, $3, $4, $5 million, the only people who are going to be able to afford to buy these houses are these huge $1 trillion companies like BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, and that's what I think is the agenda. It's probably already happening, and so that 10 years from now you won't be able to buy a house, but you'll be able to rent one from them.
We'll give you the example, Pete. Perfect way to put it. So their mission with the tokenization would be exactly what you just said. So they'll buy up, and they already have started. Bobby talked about it the other week. They've already started buying up a lot of property in the US. Their mission, buy up heaps of property. They'll go, look, sorry, Nathan, you don't have enough money to buy this house, but what you can do is use some of your UBI crypto and you can buy into a portion of it, and we'll be able to monitor how much you own, and we'll be able to monitor your finances because it's attached to it. We'll make sure you're doing your repayments, etc. And then, you link your carbon credits in. That's the scenario. That's exactly the scenario. So that's how they want to do it, because they can't do it by traditional finance. They won't be able to.
Right.
It's no coincidence they just went on a buying spree of all the Bitcoin. They own a massive portion of it now. And they're all pro-Bitcoin ETF, pro-Ethereum ETF. They'll launch an XRP one next year. That's the exact example of how they'll do it. Because we know why, but how, that's how.
It's interesting. I don't know if this is related at all, but recently in New South Wales, they took away paper title deeds for your home, and it all became digital.
Interesting. I haven't heard of that one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I thought, hang on. I actually have my father's paper title deed to his home. He gave it to me for safekeeping, because he's quite elderly. And, the reason they had paper titles with a stamp on it was that you were able to prove, if you're holding that document, that you own that property. But if that paper title becomes a digital title, sorry, the computer says no. The numbers have disappeared.
Well, BlackRock will hold it for you. Yeah. They'll keep it safe.
It's getting hot in here, and I don't know if that's because it's a hot day.
It's hot topics.
Or hot topics. Thanks for coming on. What I was particularly excited about having you on was that I want to start speaking my truth and not censoring myself, and I want to feel free to speak my truth and put it out there, and for no other reason than now it's risky for me to do that, but I think it's far riskier for me to censor myself, and so it's a gamble. And I'm willing to take that gamble because I'm interested in all things dark and shadowy. It's a dark time, and there's a lot of shadowy stuff going on. And that's my interest, and I want to shine a light on some of these shadowy things. And I don't have the answers. I don't have the facts. You can't fact check me. I actually don't have any facts. And I mean, what is a fact? There's only truth by consensus. I'm going to speak my truth. There's no absolute truth, or if there is, that's ineffable. We can't articulate what the absolute truth is. So there's only relative truths, or then we have truth by consensus. So the whole idea of fact-checking someone, I think, is nonsense anyway, and who's going to fact-check who? It's the same way who's going to define what misinformation is. Who has that authority? What person is trained well enough to be able to decipher what's misinformation, what's fact, what's truth, what isn't. And so I think we just this is the reason we need to have freedom of speech. We need to have an open market for speech and let the people choose and decide for themselves which ideas that they want to gravitate towards and which ones they want to run away from. And it is like, for me, this feels a bit like a spiritual war in a way. And what I mean by that, it's a war of ideas. And I'm looking at the ideas that are out there in the marketplace, and I don't think people have ideas. I think ideas have people. So there's an idea out there and it'll attract certain people. Like the idea of equity of outcome is attracting Kamala Harris and the Marxists and socialists. People love that stuff. They eat it up. I don't like that idea. I walk away from that one. So I think we need to have an open marketplace of ideas where people get to choose which ideas they identify with and take on board. And so I'm just going to speak my truth, and where possible, I'm going to fight for freedom of speech. I think our freedoms are worth fighting for. I think if we give up our freedoms, it'll be a bigger fight to get them back. So having you on today, what it's done is just emboldened me more and given me more conviction. And when I saw your stuff, I'm like, okay, Nate's out there, he's speaking his truth, and that just inspires me to do more of the same.
I'm glad I could be of inspiration in a small way, Pete. It's been a pleasure coming on and chatting and talking about these, at times, taboo topics, but the more you talk, the more brave you become. And for the listeners, I always like to break it down in more compartmentalized, manageable ways to action these things. Next time you're at a dinner table or you're sitting there with friends and someone challenges your idea or your worldview, instead of 9 out of 10 times just burying it and copying it and being silent, speak your truth. And that's where it all starts, is don't just be compliant all the time.
Yep.
You don't need to get in a Barney with your friends, but don't be so submissive and placid. You can speak, and if it doesn't ring true to you, just voice your concerns. Something I've always been pretty good at. However, I know a lot of people struggle with that. So that's the only way it fixes, because we're the silent majority for a reason. And the problem is we're silent, and we need to change that.
I 100% agree. I just thought of something else that might play into that, because I'm a coach. That's what I basically do with a lot of my time when I'm not podcasting. And a lot of my clients come to me for coaching. One of the big issues they have is that they have a problem with confrontation. They're not comfortable with confrontation, so they avoid confrontation and conflict at all. So they won't get involved themselves in these kind of conversations because they're not comfortable with it. And so one of the things I do when I'm coaching someone is to teach them to be comfortable with confrontation and conflict. Because if you're going to speak your mind and speak your truth, you're going to attract conflict, confrontation, debate. But isn't that what makes life exciting? Like having rigorous, robust variations of opinion and then debating those in an open forum. Isn't that what makes life interesting? It does to me. I don't want to live in a world where I'm taught and told what to think and what ideas, the only ideas that I can allow myself to think, and the only utterances I can allow myself to speak. And so like you, I encourage people to have some courage, get some skills, and learn to speak your truth, and speak your truth to power.
Amen.
Amen. Interesting, I was going to originally call my podcast Taboo.
Really?
Yeah, that was my original first title for my podcast.
That's a pretty cool name.
Yeah, I like taboo. I like things that are taboo.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Nate.
Cheers.
Cheers, buddy.
Thank you, Pete. Beautiful.
Awesome.